I also wanted to begin with the bus and end with the bus. And to think about the bus and its journeys through post-apartheid South Africa, and really to think about what that means for narrative and for poetry and for politics. Okay, so the bus, we presume initially that the bus is an object that moves through fixed space, and I'm also going to end with Zen. But we think of the bus as a fixed object moving through fixed space. Of course, I wanted to jump up and talk about rural apartheid if someone should think about it when you continue your journey, because we think of apartheid infrastructure, we think of something that looks like the American ghetto and so on. But actually, you also need to pay attention to what rural apartheid looks like from the bus. Someone can think about that. I also, I just want to begin with the city we're in. I'm going to say something about the challenges of a post-apartheid imagination, and fundamentally, one that does not just deal in the traffic in the hopes in the kind of prophetic, that is in the hope of a time to come, but also deals with the remains of apartheid and the remains also of various forms of opposition to segregation and apartheid, of which there are many. And so that requires thinking about fixed space and time, for sure. I mean, under capitalism, which is always, as Angela and Francoise have reminded us, always been race and gendered, we're fooled into thinking that space and time are fixed. They never are. Time through the laboring body, space through private property. So then we think of circuits, we think of moving through something that we're fooled into thinking is fixed. And that sort of works for a while, but it's something else. The buses, we've also been invoking it as a metaphor of our collective hopes, fantasies, dreams. That's about time travel, Neo's point. It's about time travel into a possible future. It's about utopian space-time, where space and time are collapsed. It's in music. Thank you for singing. I think every time that we've heard you sing, that's also been, and poetry. And these are ways in which space and time collapse and break also narrative form. So that's also very important. And also, since Sarah's also just arrived, I also want to think about, Achille mentioned the face. We've thought about Fanon and the kid pointing to Fanon and so on. We should also think about the surface of the city. Sarah's been reminding us in her work of this. Geez, I haven't started my timer. Jesus. The city. If you look up from where the hotel is when you drive down, and when we drive across this afternoon, you'll see we go over a ridge. That's the Verges Ridge, and it's this shaded zone. This is a map from 1952, which is used with transparencies over it to show how ideas of segregation are built on ideas of physical nature. And I'd say that so it's social, natural. Right, so Verges Ridge gently descends into the city. We're staying up there. Our conference venues have been up in the city. So it descends into the city bowl. It's green, it's leafy. Keith Breckenridge, who's that beautiful, he's talked about all these projections of the idea of whiteness, of Englishness, and that's the spatial projection of an English city. It's produced through manicured gardens and beautiful bungalow homes and so on. And it descends into a city that has always had a black working class presence because of the port, and also because of a very important site we're not seeing. Well, we'll actually drive past it when we go to Johannesburg, I think. And that's a marketplace. Durban is an amazing city-state because it has marketplace just behind actually the heart of the actual heart of the city. And particularly important because it gives black women, traders, safe space to transact, to make a livelihood. It's actually, it's actually an amazing gift that we have here. Okay, so my work is largely across the bay in this landscape here, and I'm trying to think, I'm basically trying to write this book that thinks from here about the larger social formation across the 20th century and across wider hopes and dreams and so on. Okay, so this map, the dotted areas are residential. So we're looking south of the bay, the landscape of the bay. You don't have to read very much. If you can distinguish two colors very well, that's fine. The dotted areas are residential, the rural areas are industrial, and so it's a kind of industrial residential patchwork quilt where people have been forced to live right up against oil refineries and other polluting industry. I'm going back and forth between these. So this is what it looks like. And there's something, and I'll come back to ways of seeing because it's very important. The visual and the projections that are placed on this landscape are very important. The story that I tell, I'm going to say, I'm going to talk a bit about a few moments in this larger story, and I'm going to focus on two events that we spent a lot of time on yesterday, so it's actually great. And I'm going to talk about how one event of these two events is something that is actually crucial to this city, but is never written about. There's actually no. It's an unremarked historical event that's crucial to the story. It's crucial to what Yasin was doing. And the second event is so iconic and so Alex is writing what is going to be the great work on it, but it still has its doxa. It has its settled ways of thinking, and I want to question them from here, from diaconia. Okay, so we'll get there. I'm going to just talk through a few images and get to these two events, and we'll end in time. So these are images from the 1940s, which project a notion of a vision of industrialization in South Durban, in these areas south of the port, which were marshlands, inhospitable marshlands, which were they were written about as inhospitable even for the concentration camps that were erected there at the turn of the century, which Ashwin Desai made reference to yesterday. Concentration camps from the Anglo-Boer War, the Second Anglo-Boer War, called the South African War. It wasn't always this form. Here, this image is dated 1890 to 1900 or something like that. It's a bizarre date. It's a turn of the century construction. I mean, studio touching up and all that was part of the Bananas Central. As it first was, but the banana, what it portrays is not a kind of juxtaposition of lazy harbor and tropical hinterland, and this is looking across the bay. It's supposed to be looking across the bay at civility from the barbarism of South Durban. It's of course plantation capital is there, so it's not untouched by white supremacy. The black woman leaning on the edge is, we could project all sorts of hopes of defiance, but she is also, obviously an ethnographic type, plodding onto this fantasy. I mean, Zen actually, Zen helped me read this image quite a while back, and he said, what you see is a white gaze looking through the lens and the darkroom, constructing this fantasy, and I think that's a very powerful way of thinking about this. So by the 40s, this changes, and it becomes something else. It becomes the hope of an industrial landscape. So the first event I'm going to talk about sits in between these, and I'm going to come back to it, but I have to say two things about the neighborhood as it stands now, and I'm thinking about the visual. This is an image from 1980s from a thinker who the photographer who I can't think without about these neighborhoods. His name is Cedric Brown, and he's a crucial figure in this story I'm telling. And this image is, I think, just so powerful because of what it stages in this iconic contrast, perfect in black and white, of football players and men in the shadow of refineries. It prompts a whole set of questions about race, gender, capitalism, and its wastes, and life, persistence of life, and so on. Right. So Cedric, and another thing, since we also started off looking at documentary photography in that exhibit in Johannesburg, what's really interesting about our present is that a lot of these documentary photographers have been going back to their archives and rethinking their negatives, going back to images. So there's a really interesting recursive moment in that, and all sorts of rethinking Zen as John plays himself. He's part of all of this as well. The neighborhood people yesterday mentioned the South Urban environmental struggles, and that comes out of this place. So the main community-based environmental mobilization has come out of this place, and when I first went to this landscape, I thought I was going to look at how this environmental mobilization confronted race and labor, and a very important kind of labor activism also coming out of here. And someone who I would say comes out of the white Marxist tradition said to me, who's one of our most influential scholars, unfortunately, said to me, "You're going to tell us how red and green connect." And what he missed was all the work in between, which is gender, this is women's labor, of conserving the means of struggle. That's all the work of organizing between these peaks of struggle and the men come in. And this happens through work that I call political work. People call it social work, political work, all sorts of things. But it's an everyday gendered form of politics. But something else happens, which is that this is the peak of these post-apartheid movements that fail. So this led me to think about Angela's question to us, and several things that people brought up, but thinking about failure. I mean, we have multiple failure, and what was the other word? Defeat. And I could use that, find it, suggest damage and remains, and another vocabulary for thinking about damaged forms of politics that actually might enter our imaginations through other means. And I'll come back to that as well. Another image, it's in the wrong order, but anyway. So this image is from this is an image of the concentration camp, dissolution of the concentration camps in 1902 in Wentworth, and it has this cruel caption: "First Boers leaving camps for homes." Their homes have probably been, blown up and their farms burnt down and scorched earth warfare. So it's an interesting image and as part of this archive. But the first event that I want to focus on is this one. It's represented here by a man in the Durban depot of the South African Archives, man of Indian ancestry, videotaping a stationary object, ship's list from, she's propped up against this photocopy machine, and he's filming, filming the entry of his ancestors' arrival, passage to South Africa. And he's going to use it in his centenary of his, commemorating his ancestors' arrival. Something about this practice of memory and this market is very important, food and vegetable market in the neighborhood of UCHRI. So the first event that is connected to the area around us. It's connected to what Riasan and Albi would call the Kasbah. It's connected to the making of a Creole Indianness that, despite its mixity, provides people with all sorts of artifacts to claim authenticity through what Isabel Hoffmeyer calls Indian Ocean kitsch. Films, music, saris with a lot of glitter. Indianness and kitsch can often seem synonymous. But the historical event is actually more particular. So Durban, Keith alluded to this yesterday, I'm not sure if people got it, but Durban is structured around several key racial spatial processes. one crucial part of which is something called the Durban system, which the city is praised for and, in the early 20th century. And this is a system of control of African movement, African migrant mobility and location through municipal control of the and monopoly of beer. And so it's about self-financing of a system of movement and exclusion. So that's one process. Somehow between this process of African exclusion and the imagination of a white city, steering between these two processes, people of, especially Indian, I think, indentured laborers and working class passenger Indians who pay their own passage. I'm using the word Indian provisionally because they become Indian in this landscape in a particular way by, and this is the crucial claim I'm making, by occupying space. So they occupy space in all sorts of ways. They settle in various places. I didn't show you on this map, but this map actually inadvertently marks it. This is going to be slow that I get there. This map from the 50s, there are various places where it says Indian Gardens. These are places where former indentured laborers, too many things. This is where former indentured laborers settled and, and started farming on the urban periphery. They also, built shrines, and there's some wonderful work on the Sufi presence. And anyway, I can't get into all that, but something about the planting of fruit trees, mango trees, along with dwellings, mosques, temples, and so on. The transformation of marginal and interstitial lands in the city, neglected spaces, wastelands, is crucial to this rooting of a creolized Indianness in Durban. It's a forgotten history of a subaltern occupation of space. And it actually, so it's so crucial that, and Isabel Hofmeyr pointed this out to me, I'm grateful to her for this, but many Indians in Durban continue to talk about their ancestors as 1860 settlers, marking and citing the 1820 English settlers. The English don't notice, nobody comments on this, but it's really interesting. And we don't think enough about how the dispossessed take place. They have to go somewhere else. They have to occupy some kind of place unless they're, drowned, as Elliot reminded us poignantly yesterday. So this language of becoming settlers it's more than mimicry. It's not just going in mimicry. It's about actual space making. Now, there's a period in which the descendants of Indian indentured laborers and working class Indians attract a lot of attention from social reformers from India, from British India, who come here and try to make people good Muslims and good Hindus, and then they retreat. And basically they retreat. I mean, a lot of people who've worked on these issues have written about it. But as anti-colonial nationalism becomes more territorial and eugenic, sons of the soil and all that, the nationalists retreat to the territory of India and dispossess their diaspora. So these people are multiply dispossessed, and that's when they become Indian against the constant threat of repatriation and racism and so on. So it's a very important history because this is where people become Indians in racial and quotidian terms with the capacity for anti-racist critique. And there's great work. John Sosky has written beautiful work about what happens in the 50s, following this, 40s and 50s, as Indians, now a racial category affirmed in everyday life, create an entire, infrastructure for working class black people, and there are all sorts of insults and injuries on buses and all that, which sets the ground for this program, 1949. It doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes out of seething anger. Okay, so that's the first event, and I'm not going to say anything else about it because the second one is too exciting. Oh, one little thing. I'm trying to think a little bit with Dilip's. We're not reading Chinese scholars and all that, but I'm trying to think about what are the resources that people have who are dispossessed, and trying to draw from work by Anand Pandyan in South India, anthropologist of Tamil Nadu, on where a lot of people came to this landscape, about how, and Anand writes about how in South India there's a particular history of mutual transformation of self and landscape, and I'm arguing that might be part of how people transform themselves in relation to something I call an Indian commons, which is racially, it's a contradictory term. An Indian commons is you know, it soon becomes the everyday geography of racism. And in the book, I'm trying to pose this story of space making, contradictory space making, all space making under, you know, capitalism, which is always race and gender, is always contradictory. And I'm trying to think of this in relation to this, the thing that becomes a colored neighborhood, people who become colored, who in the early 20th century are largely tenants, and whose experience, whose life histories are about movement, and about constant movement, and about constant transformation of the self. And they continue, places like Wentworth, the place next to the refinery that I showed you a picture of, continues to have this character of, you know, this particular kind of pathos. It's connected to some of the conversation we were having about mixture in the last session. Okay, there's a lot, and that happens in between. I'll just say, let's speak through a few bits. And yeah, this is an image of men on a bus, and there are other buses. This is a man on a bus with a race zoning map, and they're probably looking at, you know, a landscape of imagined segregation. And I think these images of images are very interesting. They tell us a lot about what you're seeing. And what I interpret this as telling us something about what Thongchai Venerable calls the assumed geobody in the map. And Thongchai writes about nationalism in Thailand. And this is the assumed geobody is the projection, the fantasy of a white city. Okay, it doesn't work. Keith Breckenridge is the great scholar of that. Another image I couldn't resist showing you. This is Durban. The beaches in front of our hotel and all that, white beaches, bombed during World War II, allegedly to fend off invasion by Japanese. There was a submarine sighting. It was actually, you know, German, but Japanese are more scary. So we see this muscle serviceman walking down the beach, and followed by women and children. Woman puts her child on the fence, like a little prop in bourgeois normality, mid-century modern buildings. And in the middle, a black domestic servant who looks back and refuses this. She looks away from our gaze, which is also very important. I'm also trying to think of apartheid through, and the kind of construction of apartheid through District 9 as an allegory, not just of the present, but also of apartheid. And there's a lot to say about this, obviously, but I'm not going to say anything because I want to get to the second event. So the first event is something that, is forgotten, the subordinate occupation of space, making of this contradictory space called the Indian, which I'm calling an Indian Commons. It's what is, Riasan presumes and is not interrogating. Sorry. The second event is what happens when, the revolutionary moment of the 70s and 80s, when a lot of things are thrown in the air, and there's really a question. It begins with the Durban moment, which Alex told us a lot about, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but my main contention is that with the leadership of a putatively Leninist movement, banned, jailed, and exiled, these neighborhoods designated Indian and colored in Durban, which are not subject to the intense surveillance and proxy violence in African townships, become crucibles of various kinds of political creativity. And that's what we see. So I'm looking from a particular vantage point, Alex, when I'm looking at these events, and I'm trying to parse out 4 moments in this revolutionary outburst. The first is called the Durban moment. It's actually named, and we heard about it. So it begins with the dock worker strikes. We don't know, the question of archives and this liquid archives, we don't know the Indian Ocean origins of the dock worker strike, and it's got to be, there's all sorts of things. The linguists have told us that, Rajan Maestri tells us, that Tamil, Durban, people in Durban who are called Tamils often drop their H's and add H's, just like Cockney, and it's like a Cockney thing from seafarers. So there are also the surprising things. Okay, so but Dock Worker Strike 72 spills out into this broader set of strikes in the area that Alex is focusing on across industrial Durban, where we'll be going next in the afternoon. It's connected to student activism, to New Left critique. There are all sorts of entangled histories. I mean, Zen's parents are, where is he? Zen's parents are actually wonderful examples of these intertwined histories. And they draw black theology. There's wonderful work on the importance of black theology to what becomes the Black consciousness movement. So Steve Biko's residence, while he was forming this, what later becomes what's called the Black consciousness movement, was in this building, what was called the Alan Taylor residence, next to the oil refinery in the center of Wentworth. So he's in these neighborhoods, before I say more about that, so yeah, there's also, Ashton brought this up, there's also a revival of the Natal Indian Congress, the old radicalization of the older Congress tradition, and they take different paths, and I call this, and it's also seen, this is my contention, that it's seen primarily as a labor struggle. But it's actually a confluence of all these things. We can't get away from that. It is also a labor struggle, of course. And the dreams of, and this is how it's brought into our political present, in the dreams of a new Labour Party, centered on NUMSA. And so we've been talking about the NUMSA moment. Alex mentioned this, in citing the Durban moment in that way. And I think that misses something crucial, and I want to think about that here. I think it's something deeper. I call it a theological political moment, an interconnected set of leaps of faith into the political unknown. So it's about doing politics in a space like this, or in the bus. So what's also so interesting about and important about, not mentioned about this space, about Biko's, and the Alan Taylor residence, was that given the long history of African exclusion, the Durban system, and so on, this was a place where mixed, black population could come together and think, and also, they were trained to be doctors. So, there's also professionalization. They're aspiring middle class progressives, and they could imagine taking some of the history of biopolitics and radicalizing it. Right? Keith Breckenridge, again, I have to cite, Keith's done some amazing work, and Keith and Catherine have been crucial to the way I've been, we actually have a debate at Wiser, which we have to stage a bit on biopolitics, about, historical, quasi-Marxist interpretation and Achilles. We're going to do that. Anyway, so given the long history of African exclusion, there's a class of aspiring middle class progressives who are thinking about something else, and they are thinking about radicalizing biopolitics, turning into other ends. Through a set of fortuitous events, Biko and his circle at Alan Taylor come into contact with a group of young women and men in Amir Bank, who are called the Community of St. Stephen's. Their basement was painted dark with psychedelic lights and hippie posters. They had long hair, funky t-shirts, and transgressive relationships. Zen is a product of this transgression. They connected with groups in Cape Town, some went abroad in the US. They met Black Power activists. One of them was at an event celebrating Angela Davis's release from prison. And I think this is quite poignant to think of these kids. I mean, we think of the great intellectuals moving and thinking and all that, but this is really interesting. These kids from this township, and Biko was really interested in them because they were these township kids, and they were really questioning things in an interesting way. Members of this group speak about the incredible sense of possibility they felt in a church basement with a theological warrant to support their faith in the possibility of change. They had intense discussions, they listened to music, they felt connected with what one former member called the wider revolt, more directly associated with white youth. And then when they connected with BICO, what these groups shared was a strategic interest in community programs. We're going to Black community programs, are we? Later. And as sites of autonomy, not unlike Alondra Nelson's account of parallel shifts in the Black Panther Party in the US. And this is crucial. The praxis of community organizing contributed something intangible yet crucial to the wider spirit of anti-authoritarianism, a new sense of political embodiment forged in the fault lines between political blackness and racially defined neighborhoods. And this is where space on the surface and the face, the questioning these two actually comes into contradiction. This contradictory praxis brought biopolitics out of workplace demands for living wages to the domain of the self and of neighborhoods, to question the death-dealing articulation of racial embodiment and urban space, to paraphrase Ruth Wilson Gilmore. There's a lot more to say about this group and so on. I'm kind of obsessed with them, but what makes them possible, what makes this possible, and the limits it confront takes us back to that, what I call the contradictory Indian commons. So these events are closely intertwined. This contradictory Indian commons makes space for this kind of emergence, but also is something that they have to wrestle with. So here was one way in which questioning the strange contradictory object, the Indian commons, this is what, this is behind Zen's, comment yesterday, I think. This becomes part of a revolutionary moment which questions the non-racialism of the ANC, Ahmed Kathrada's position. And black power, black consciousness becomes a spark that connects radical traditions of the Atlantic with the African Indian Ocean. Now, I can't say very much about the other moments. I'll just mention them. The second moment is I call it the moment of insurrection. It has to do with ideas of armed struggle. It is channeled by the Natal Indian Congress was never banned, and so they become crucial kingpins in the underground. And the ANC in exile really did not, realized that it did not direct these incredible struggles. Alex is, nodding in agreement. Of the 70s, including the Soweto uprising, it did not direct the stuff. It didn't know, it was worried, I think, about how to come in and harness this in a, hegemony of the future. And so there's this parable that people narrate of a trip to Vietnam to see this revolutionary icon from Vietnam, General Vu Nguyen Gia, who is this kind of figure who recurs in a lot of narratives. Someone who fought the French and defeated the French and the Americans and all that. And basically, General Gia tells them, organize, organize, organize. And that mass organizing has to be at the heart of your strategy. And they interpret this in different ways. One strand turns to trying to rebuild an underground. This is the work that Helen is a veteran of this work. We don't think of construction. We don't think of the work of the labor of construction in building a racial capitalist landscape. We also don't think of the labor of construction in building opposition. So that's the revolutionary labor that's forgotten. It's gendered always. So this insurrectionary moment, and I wanted to ask Kathrada about all this, but anyway, it's cloaked in a particular. By the sorry, I'm just going to look at my notes for a second and find myself. Right, so the third moment, this is what it is. Yeah, this trip to Jap is interpreted, this parable is used to interpret different kinds of possibilities, and they play out differently in different places, and these two neighborhoods happen to be a window into seeing how they play out differently. One way in which it plays out is what I call a moment of organization, where there's, this is the much celebrated internal movement struggles of the 1980s, the making of a coalition of urban organizations in Durban, the linking of civic labor struggles and so on, all led by a small group of ANC operatives who happen to be Indian. And again, this is where the Indian Commons rears its head again and racializing and into the racial nationalism of particular kind of interpretation of the ANC. So that's one trajectory, the making of of an urban movement that doesn't actually become a struggle for the city, in the way that Michael Keith was proposing. And what my hope in writing this initially, I thought I wanted to write. I'm gone over my 30 minutes. Take just a few minutes. I'm just going to take a couple minutes, please.
That's fine, but not 30.
Oh no. So. I thought I was going to write. I thought I wanted to write a kind of C.L.R. James of the concept of biopolitics, about the ways in which the tools of the biopolitical tools of segregation were used to call it into question. And this moment is where I had to question that, because the revolutionary experts were not really invested in transforming their own lives in many ways. I mean, not all of them, but they. And so this is where I turn to what I call the moment of the disqualified, which is turns to places where fundamentally uncontrollable outlaw cultures were too creative or undisciplined to be entirely manageable by the Leninists. These are people who are called gangsters and who don't play along with the proper left politics. And this turns me to this notion of damaged critique. I could say more about it, but I'm not going to. And all these moments, I think, are still part of our present. The moment of insurrection has become, Oscar Pistorius' fear brings together crime fear, what Achille calls the Israelization of everything, the building of this kind of security archipelago that we live in, and the ANC policing the crisis in a particular form. And I think the hopes of the present are embedded in something like the embers of this political theological moment, but also the disqualified, the wageless, and the people whose anger is being tapped into by the EFF. I just want to end with a few images that in thinking about the archive of the damaged, and the people who leave no objects, we can find various ways of thinking about it. So this is a set of images that were part of a collection, part of a show in Durban on gangsters of Wentworth. They're just kids sitting in this much mythologized part of the neighborhood where these lanes run down a little hillside. And what's so beautiful about these images, I think, is that, and this one is beautiful, particularly beautiful, this is amateur photography that is so perfectly showing how people share the pleasure of being in the lanes, right? And this one in particular, how young people share being here. And when the gangs are taken out by the combination of the church and the cops, the lanes are walled in. So this is a lost space of a lost bus. But there are the people who walk around the community and are still, I think, trying to use the hopes of biopolitical struggle, class struggle, anti-race struggle, gender struggle is also biopolitical struggle, in new form. This is a guy who walks around. He's a community health worker who tries to, work against the everyday logic of racism and he doesn't have any formal education, and he attends seminars, picks up knowledge. He's not an expert in authorized form. I just want to end with that. Thanks.
2 words before I begin really with the presentation. I started to work, I've been working on the Indian Ocean for a while now. My first work was about mapping a contact zone. It was about the Southwest Indian Ocean, the island of Comoros, Seychelles, Madagascar, Réunion, Mauritius, and Africa, how it is constituted through the diaspora and what kind of diaspora you're on. And also after a corridor of city with, and I work with Sarah and Abdul Malik Simon on that, and Sarah did a beautiful work on the literature of the Indian Ocean, Abdul Malik on cities, and I was doing this on a Chinese restaurant in Africa. The waving, pulling the thread, and the different migration of the different Chinese migration, and what was the restaurant, what kind of food you had. Did you have the same recipe in Durban and Maputo when you had noodles? So I get to taste a lot of things. And then this museum that we have been alluded to, and that I call the museum without object, which doesn't mean that they would not have had object, but we will not have started from the object. And it was not about a national museum, nor about a museum about a struggle, but a museum about the anonymous. all the women and men who are building the world, but we never know them. Neither their name, nor their face, nor their lives. And so, but we will not inhabit that earth without them. Those who build the place we are in and feed us. And for that museum, I suggested the time and space will not be the time and space, neither France or Africa or India or China will be the space of the Indian Ocean. So the ocean as a cultural and social space. The water as another space of encounter. And there, effectively, when you look at that in the Indian Ocean, Africa is no longer shaped by the encounter with Europe and the transatlantic slave trade, but by its encounter with Asia. And there's a long history of, and the role of the monsoon, that the role of the monsoon play. And so this question of modernity, other modernity. But before I take you to 2 or 3 moments of the journey about, what we are asked to talk about, Utopian Ocean and liquid archives that, Sharad, illustrated so well, I want to do a little thing because you cannot talk about the ocean, the Indian Ocean, before thanking those who came before us. So 1 second. No, don't listen. Voilà, you can open your eyes. And the second moment before really getting, I will read just a short poem by Derek Walcott. Where are your monuments, your battles, martyrs? Where is your troubled memory? Served in that grave vault, the sea. The sea has locked them up. The sea is history. Exodus, bone soldered by Goral to bone, mosaic, mantled by the benediction of the sharp shadow. That was the ark of the covenant, then came from the plucked grass of sunlight on the seafloor. And my last thing, it's the language of the Indian Ocean. So we don't speak only French and English, a language of this diasporic formation. Depuis bon vieux siècle, l'océan Indien la donne à l'espace où ça y trouvait l'un et l'autre. Il fait l'essence, vous mettez ensemble pour moyen de tactalisation, où c'est bataille, où c'est mais une bonne affaire neuve. Et l'espace la culture, où ça donne des mounis sortent d'un pays l'Afrique, avec bon pays l'Asie, l'invente bonne cérémonie, bon langage, la musique, bonne frontière, bonne religion. Et puis la bonne chemin pour tiempo ensemble. It's in Creole Réunion. And the last thing I would like to do, and this is why I brought that, because I say, we have to, if we are here talking about the non-racial archive, it's also because people, were before us and died for that. So, for those who do not want to do it, doesn't matter. That's okay. Roberta, you want to?
So, we're going to sing together again.
So these are for the ancestor, for the travelers, for the ghosts as yesterday, who inhabit our world, for the dead without sepulture, for those who are traveling today, self-traveled.
James, would you help me? I put a lyric, it's a Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. It means Iemanjá is the queen of the sea. And Iemanjá is maybe the most famous Orisha because she's the mother, she's the generator principle. And the salty sea represents also the tears of the mother for the brought children. There are the fish. The fishes represent all humans, are billions, millions, and she doesn't make difference. For her, everything is equal. So we're going to sing together. Doesn't matter if you believe or not in what I'm saying. The challenge is to sing together, as our Professor Achilles said, people who can sing together can organize together. And the challenge is one voice. Believe it or not, we sing together this in one voice. Our voices together. We think different, but now singing is together. So, where is it? It's not working? Okay. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Can you say this together? Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. And the tone is Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Just it. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Now low. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. It's too low. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Then low. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Deep. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Na high. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá, low, é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Salve o povo, salve ela. Salve meu pai Oxalá. Salve Oxóssi, salve os guia. Salve Ogumberama, não é Iemanjá. Iemanjá, é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Just voice. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Make your voice wave. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá, Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. Iemanjá é a rainha do mar. This is for Neymar and all those who fall in the combat.
So that was to cite the ancestor, and of course, if we talk about liquid archives, the gods and goddess of the sea and the ocean. So about the Indian Ocean, the theme was, I want to say 2 or 3 things, and I was asked also to make what are the difference or the similarity with the Caribbean and the Atlantic. As you know, the Indian Ocean, it's a millenary cultural and social space of young very old migrations, the first one being, the Austronesian coming to Madagascar from Taiwan, meeting with the Bantu, and Madagascar being also a formation between Bantu and Austronesian. And through that, effectively, the process of creolization, what we call creolization. So it's really about the encounter. And the encounter is, what that wish is not yet known. We don't know what's going to happen to that encounter. That which arrive, the unforeseen, the unexpected. That means what is called history. So the question of friction, conflict, asymmetry, and also original language still being surviving, and how this, works with this question of creolization, which is not an accumulation of differences, but a dynamic of unfinished process of borrowing, mimetically and creatively, and without forgetting, the question of roots. So it's a philosophy of borrowing, forgery, imitation, making do, fixing up, mending, of giving shape and giving meaning to a world subject to continual conflicting input. It's a community in living, represented linguistically, socially, and discursively. In a way, an impossible community, but a community that exists. Impossible in the sense that there are no fixed time and no protected historical space. So what is narrated in the face of desire and for spatio-temporal closure and for the communitarian norm is rather the dark side of desire, of loneliness, the friction at the heart of everyday life. But in that, we have to avoid the insularity of the feeling that we are exceptional, that, of course, it's a need, for each of us. We want to think that each of us is exceptional. And it's true that, to a certain extent, effectively, each of us is exceptional. But that exception cannot exist without the collective. It does not mean, anything that I will tell you, my exceptional story. It will take meaning because it enters the collective. This is why, for instance, yesterday I was a little like that with the panel, thinking that the question of the whitening the working class or the question of division could happen only in South Africa was aborted. The whitening of the working class has been a global phenomenon, and the question of effectively who is going to be the last group against which we will whiten and enter the community of equal is happening still today. So that's one thing. And so how effectively you have diaspora as differentiation and diaspora as difference. And the question of effectively, and we can look at it today, of what Roa was talking about, genomics politics, the reinvention of tradition, of being something, the reinvention even of civilization, I belong to a great and ancient civilization, of course, here and there. And sometimes even to the extent that today you have a struggle about the place where humanity was born. Was it Africa, or perhaps we're going to find it in China? This is so important to know, as if we, effectively this question of origin situated with a place will say something about anything, And so this reinvention of identities through class and gender, of course, versus diaspora as difference. So I wanted just to make that point. We talk, these are different points I'm making about, the subject. We talk a lot about the question of visibility and invisibility, of making things visible, and how it was important. I want to suggest something. I want to remind us that invisibility can also be a conscious strategy to counter modernity's injunction to transparency. We have to become transparent and intelligible to everyone. And it's not always good, and everyone who has been in a struggle knows that it's not always good to be visible. One must have to hide to protect oneself from the gaze, to keep something secret from the public, to protect intimacy, to invoke also other things, And the accumulation of the others, of photo of the other in 19th century, other in 20th century, as we know, testify to the desire to index, classify, and record every living form fixed into an image. The right to withdraw from the camera, to remain silent, and the right to opacity belong to a long history of resistance. And I just want to put the boys who wrote of leaving then the world of the white man and stepping within the veil, this question, of going somewhere. And as we do know, colonial society, under slavery or post-slavery, you had the culture of the night, going in the night, to effectively hidden from the gaze of the owners or of the colonizer, and where songs and ritual, evocation of ancestors, plot of insurrection, and dream of the future were enacted. Remember that the beginning of the insurrection in Saint-Domingue was during a night with a ritual, where they swore to each other that they would crush slavery. Le serment du bois caïman. So this is extremely, I would say. So, but neither visibility nor invisibility should be essentialized. The play between visibility and visibility contribute to shifts in meaning and in function at multiple points. So it's working on, distance and difference. And yet invisibility has become the mark of powerlessness. If you are not visible, that you have not power, that everyone wants to become visible. And the strategy of giving face to the faceless, voice to the voiceless, and all the political representation that we have been discussing for decades now. And the endless exploration of the image fabricated by Europe about its other, right? But the strategy of denunciation and indignation can run counter, I think, to the objective of transforming the hegemony of the gaze. I was remember, and actually with that, the exhibition L'Invention du Sauvage at the Musée du Quai Branly, which was intended to educate the public about Europe's, looking at different people, insisting on the necessity of deconstructing representation that will then contribute to challenging practices of discrimination, because, we will give them a name, we will give them a life, we will free these people from the shackles in which, they were held, and, and we will then understand difference, That was even one of the curators saying that. In other words, if I see the other with respect and tolerance, I will accept her as my equal, and everything will be fine. And this will mask totally the material condition of erasure and visibility. Why it's absolutely important to erase and make invisible, and why some people will use effectively also invisibility as a tool. These lives, as I say, are made invisible by necessity. The refined culture of Europe in the 18th century was possible only with the erasure of the figure of the slave. It was possible, effectively, to live and being silent around a cup of tea or coffee and even debate about slavery, sweetened with the sugar produced by the slave, at the price of not inviting the slave to share that moment, of course. And today, a new form of predatory economy demands the erasure of the living and working condition of those who produce the goods we enjoy. Our world is absolutely contaminated with the erasure and invisibility. Yet, let's be aware that visibility and invisibility are not distributed equally between power and powerlessness, and that perhaps the strategy of the powerlessness is not necessarily to enter the logic of visibility and visibility, but to reinvent our own political visibility and invisibility. Pierre Vidal-Naquet, for instance, has warned against our will to want to explain everything, of getting to the truth of the matter. And he said that in the will to explain everything, there is also the will to write it off, to erase it in a way. So how then to integrate what must be left off, what must remain intangible, invisible, like the invisible spirit, and the voice, and create, our intimate world, but not necessarily by making them visible, but to evoke them, This is what we consider a world in which the intangible matters as much, if not more, than the tangible. Where culture is embodied in human being, in the exchange and the encounter, and not in stones and objects. We are a narrative species. We love to tell stories, and we love to listen to story. With an endless faculty to fantasize, we grow up with story, and they contribute to making us who we are. We live in an intangible world of text, image, sound, and word, and this is why I wanted to start with music rather than just. Now I want to move to another point about, the question of the Indian Ocean after that, the politics of visibility and invisibility, and perhaps other strategy back to the question of liquid archives, and back perhaps also to history. Next year, as we know, we will celebrate Bandung. And Bandung, we can talk endlessly about Bandung. I just want to raise one point about Bandung, the presence of Richard Wright at the Bandung conference of an African American. You know, after that, as you know, he wrote The Color Curtain. So that the different route like that. And he wrote about the Bandung things, the despised, the insulted, the hurt, the dispossessed, in short, the underdog of the human race we're meeting. Here, where class and racial and religious consciousness on a global scale. Who had thought of organizing such a meeting? And what has this nation in common? Nothing, it seems to be me. But what their past relationship to the Western world had made them feel. This meeting of the rejected was in itself a kind of judgment upon that Western world. They were getting a new sense of themselves, getting used to new roles and new identities. Imperialism was dead here. And as long as they could maintain their unity, organize and conduct international conference, there will be no return to imperialism. So that was also the utopia and the dream. But what also, as I say, I'm interested in the presence of Richard White in Bandung, in this Pan-African Asian movement, and what that meant for him about racial politics and non-racial politics in the United States. But remember also at the Bandung conference were also Alun Diop, the man who created Présence Africaine in Paris afterwards, and looking at, when he was at Bandung, he said, I have to do a cultural Bandung. This has to be followed by a cultural Bandung. And in 1956 was the first Congress of black artists and writers in Paris, where you had again James Baldwin, Aimé Césaire, and Frantz Fanon, and others. So you had this connection, Caribbean, African American, Africa, Asian. And this, I thought, was also is interesting about the question of archives. And this Pan-Afro-Asian solidarity was extremely important. And this question then of the non-aligned, that usually is seen as just not being aligned with Moscow or Washington, but also was about non-aligned with the kind of globalization that was going on, the kind of economic development that was proposed, that was suggested. And I think that is also important, non-aligned with what, about what for what. So if today we wanted to reimagine non-alignment, will be non-aligned with what? What do we want to not to be aligned with? At the time, it was effectively clearly about imperialism, or about to choose between, Soviet planified economy and a Washington free market, to say that in 2 words. But today, what will be, what will be non-aligned with what? What will be our non-alignment? So what is a non-alignment with non-racial, but in which way? Who is, what we could, and I think that, in that sense, invoking Bandung is interesting, is important today, not just as an archive. And we know that Bandung was followed by other, and that, retrieving all the history of this kind of archive, is the Indian Ocean Zone of Peace, all these different moments of this Pan-African Asian world that was important. So that was my 4th point, or whatever. My 5th point, I want to talk about, also, when we talk about this space, the ocean, we have to talk about the military. It has always been important, of course, for, imperialist power to control the sea. And in the Indian Ocean, it's really has been, as you know, battle between Washington and Moscow. Who will get the military base, and people effectively wanting the Indian Ocean Zone of Peace was about having no military base. No, of course, I did not win. And I'm particularly interested in the Chagos Island. You know about the Chagos Island? Yeah. No? Yeah, okay. And the fact that this is, in the middle of the ocean, not far from us, this is one of the most important US military bases. One of the most important US military bases is there. And they had to expel, the people, the population, in 1968. And these are descendants of Africans living on this island. And they were expelled to Mauritius, where they live in total poverty today, and have been through endless, trial and court and so on, and none of their demand has been received. And this in the middle of our ocean here, just right there, you have this incredible base and the transformation of incredible paradise, tropical paradise, into absolutely covered, with submarines, absolutely done, so that the plane can take off and go bomb, and so you can cover Africa, up to Afghanistan and down like that. And where you have had effectively what we call extraordinary rendition, not we, but what the US government called. So this is, you know, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, you have Guantanamo plus, you know. So this is also about effectively the kind of archives. How can we not think about that? How can we not think about the Indian Ocean as also the place where 80% of the oil that is produced goes through? If you know the Canal of Mozambique, just right there, this is where all the container, you know, of oil goes through. So this is why it's so important to control that place. And it's also an ocean where Islam has been for centuries. And in fact, the most important, I mean, we had this talk about, you know, the Strait of Malacca. But the point is that at one point, I knew it was Muslims who controlled the trade in the Indian Ocean. And in fact, we set up the rule by which you could have this free kind of exchange. The role also of, you know, anti-capital, anti-free market set up by a tradition that has to be also thought about. Another point I wanted to make about the Indian Ocean is piracy. You know, pirates have been, you know, long been in the Indian Ocean all through, you know, all through the, right? And how today, with the pirates, you know, on the coast of Somalia, there is a reinforcement of a lot of new maritime law that we don't know about because we don't feel we are concerned, but are absolutely transforming the freedom of circulation and what is to be, you know, like who has the right to the sea and who doesn't have the right to the sea. And then, of course, not talking about the fact that they both quote Somalia and, you know, what you need to survive. And the fact that what is free is for this huge container, you know, taking, you know, all this to circulate, but not for this poor people. And we know how, for instance, the fish industry has been totally destroyed along this coast. So this guy has also to. The question of the destruction of landscape, and you alluded to, you know, and it's absolutely transforming all this part. But also the new migration, and this is going to be, you know, we talk quite a lot about race and gender. And today in the Indian Ocean, it's mostly women who are trafficked or are circulating. Malagasy women working in the Gulf, Filipinas, Bangladeshi, I mean, we could go on and on and on, on and on. And the fact that effectively they contribute to the reproduction of work, you know, as we know, you know, the care for the elderly, the care for the children, they clean, they are totally invisible. And I wanted to remind you know, how work has been masculinized, even yesterday when we were talking about the mine and plantation, as if you don't have women around. In the plantation you had women, sugar cane, the men were cutting the cane, and the women were cleaning them. You know, and putting them, you know, I mean, and around the mine, you had women, right, doing whatever they had to do to reproduce so the miner could go back to the mine in the morning. So why are the women invisible in this, you know, story about, or we have just to say that they exist, you know, but what do they do? What do they take, you know, bring with them? And so about this question, you know, how do we think the liquid archives? I want to propose a notion, you know, for this liquid archive as a non-racial, the notion of the palimpsest. As you know, the palimpsest is this manuscript, you know, a manuscript page from which the text has been scrapped or washed off so that it can be used again. Okay, so we start from there. So it's, you know, it's preserved the distinctness of individual text, and it exposes the contamination by the other text. This process of layering of text or memories, you know, I say text, but it can be memories or song. For instance, the song you heard, it's absolutely, it's done by the music of the slave of Réunion Island, but with a lot of borrowing from India, with the indentured worker coming, working on the plantation afterwards. So this is why you heard, you know, different type of music and different, you know, attends, what is quelle destinée? Oh yeah, so he say, okay, I will find the translation later, so the Creole word coming to my mind. So to go back that, this song was a palimpsest text and a palimpsest form of music. So even though, the process of layering which created the palimpsest was born out of a need to erase and to destroy previous texts, the re-emergence of those will destroy, this is what also you show, Sharad, re-ender structures that privilege heterogeneity and diversity. So the archive are a product of the productive violence of the involvement, entanglement, interruption, inhibition of genre and utterance, yes? So it's building a galaxy of signifiers. Multilinearity, node links and networks, and we heard a lot of that. And you have visual manifestation and sonic manifestation of that, not just textual. Of also what the archaeologists call cumulative palimpsest, of a successive episode of deposition and layers of activity that remain superposed one upon the other without loss of evidence, right? And for instance, we could think of Kilwa in Africa. Yeah. So instead of providing a narrative of origin and evolution, palimpsests trace, the inscription and erasure of different cultures, which in turn compete and struggle with each other. So the present that the palimpsest project is constructed by the unintended presence of text from the past and the possibility of the inscription of future text. So the archive of the non-racial built a palimpsest that contained the past, the present, and what is yet to come. And I will end with something because I want to. Okay. In some archives, they tell you that women who lived in India in the 19th century to be sent to different European colonies as indentured workers, in the hem of their dress, they carry the seeds needed for cooking and rituals. And arriving in the place, they will undo the hem and plant the seeds. So what do women carry with them? And if they constitute, in majority the new diasporic movement, they carry what is yet to come. Not because they are female and give birth, but because if they remain invisible, in most narrative and archive as a non-racial, and I, remember the argument on invisibility to challenge the modernity injunction to transparency, then, they will... Oh my God, I've lost my... So, okay. So for this question, to refuse the image as a literal translation of identity and to invent, in this liquid archive, another way of being and existing in the world. And so focus on the encounter that constitutes the first step to build solidarity, rather than on the thing. And I wanted to finish with something, but I can't find my little thing. You give me 2 seconds if I find my paper. Oui, c'est le palimpsest, So much a palimpsest that, I have forgotten my... Okay. Oh, it was a quote, a beautiful quote by... voilà. Okay, I wanted to end with a quote from James Baldwin. Perhaps home is not a place, but an irrevocable condition. Thank you.